All right. Hey, we're going to get going. And hey, so excited to have all of you here. Really appreciate you taking advantage of this. And our speaker with us will be Chad Ragsdale. And Chad is the academic dean at Ozark Christian University in Joplin, Missouri. And then also he's written a book on Hebrews, or written a book on loving God with your mind, and doing some great stuff. And he was with us about 4 years ago as he was talking about just tech and our kids and raising them up in this tech age. And so maybe at some point in time, he'll probably even allude to some of that content. But super excited for Chad to be with us tonight and then into the morning tomorrow at our services. And tomorrow's service will be a little more general, and tonight's is really honed in and focused on teenagers. And so, again, just love the fact that you're here taking advantage of this. And then also a plug is with Chad, in addition to him, we've got a gentleman coming in, Ryan Gold, and he's a pastor here locally, but he has a real gift of teaching apologetics and worldview to teens. And so he is going to be with us April 2nd, 9th, and 16th on Wednesday night in our student ministry. He'll teach for about 35 minutes, but really want to make, as we are trying to partner with you, we're also trying to equip the kids and do the best that we can to help these teens as they're coming up, and they have so many different things coming at them, to just stay true to the faith, or even come to the faith, or dig deeper into their faith. And so Chad, as I said, is a step in that process of coming alongside you and your kiddos. So we're excited for that and thrilled to have him with us. And so I'm going to say a word of prayer for us, and then I'll hand it off to Chad. And our format for this evening will be 45 minutes-ish of teaching. We'll take about a 5-minute break or so, maybe 10 at the most. We'll come back to 45 more minutes, and then you'll have a Q&A at the end. So maybe as we're going along, write down some questions in a notebook if you've got it, or even a tablet or on your phone or something like that that you want to ask him towards the end. That'd be great. So let's pray, and we'll hand this off. Father, grateful for this evening, and just pray for an anointing on the words of Chad, and I pray for the hearts and the minds of these parents, and indeed, Lord, that the teens that we have would be growing up to be strong and vibrant in faith in you, Lord, as they go and shine your light bright into this world. And we give you this in the name of Jesus, amen. Take it away, Chad. Would you give a warm welcome, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening. Thanks for being here. It's not lost on me. The idea of you being here on a Saturday night because you want to be better parents and more effective and love your kids as well as you can, and that means a lot. Matter of fact, just the fact that you're here tonight tells me that you're gonna be okay, because one of the core things that I've learned through the years, talking to teachers, talking to parents, one of the basic things that I've learned through the years is that so much of what counts in raising a kid is just caring. Because you're going to mess up. You're going to screw up. You're not going to know all the answers. But just showing up and caring, that's so much of the battle. So the fact that you're here tonight, it means a lot. So I'm thankful that you're here. Just a brief word of it. Actually, no, I'll introduce myself after I get to know you a little bit. So my focus tonight is on parenting kids from about the age of 11 up to about the age 14. So how many of you have a kid or kids in your house right now between the ages of 11 and 14? Raise your hand. Okay, most of us. Is there anybody in the room that you had kids in that age group, and now they're beyond that age group now? Anybody in that boat? Okay, quite a few of you. That's my wife and I. We're in that boat right now. Any of you, and I see over here, any of you like this age is still yet to come? So you've got younger kids. Okay, great, awesome. Virtually all of us in the room are in that sweet spot, trying to navigate these tricky years. We call them the middle school years, the junior high years, whatever you want to call them. But I like to call it parenting in the middle. This critical age from about the age of 11 up until right when they're getting ready to go into high school. Just this critical season of life for our kids and this critical season of life for us as parents. Now, first thing I want to do before I get into my little teaching thing here, So my wife and I, we're in a small group at our church, and we are somehow this happened. We woke up one day and we were the old couple in the small group. I don't know how it happened, but we joined this new small group. We showed up the first day that this group was meeting, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's how they see us. So everybody else in the group, like literally we have 3 newborns in the group, got a lot of elementary kids, and my wife and I, we have 2 kids in college. I'm going to introduce them in a second. We have 2 kids in college. We have another daughter who's a freshman in high school. And actually, my wife and I love this season that we're in, where we get to pour into and invest in these younger families in our church and in our life group. And one of the things that I tell them insistently, to the point of just being obnoxious about it, is I tell these younger families, enjoy and treasure every single season of your child's life. And, hopefully things like that can go without saying, but I've found that in life, sometimes the things that go without saying need to be said. Because what we fall into this busyness trap, right? Where I'll sit there and I'll listen to these young families as they talk about their days, about their weeks, about their schedules. And it's always like, oh, we're busy with this and we've got this going on. We got 10 different activities that we're involved in. And it's just very stressful and everybody's stressed. And everybody's trying to figure out how to be all things for their kids. And if you're not careful, you can fall into the trap of just like, oh, I can't wait until we're out of this season. I can't wait until things slow down. I can't wait until our lives are a little bit less hectic, a little bit less crazy. And so we fall into that I can't wait sort of language, that I can't wait sort of mindset. And if we're not careful, in the process of saying, I can't wait, we're missing the blessings of the season that we're in. Every single season of your child's life comes along with blessings and also challenges. There are blessings and challenges in newborns. There are blessings and challenges in elementary age students. I have kids that are entering into adulthood. There are blessings and challenges that go along with that. So one of the things that I'm trying to be disciplined in as a parent is I want to enjoy my kids in the season of life that they're in. My oldest son, he's 20 years old. I love having conversations with a 20-year-old man. I love it. It's scary. A lot of times it's terrifying, because the types of things, matter of fact, we were talking last night, my son, he's got a lot of struggles with anxiety and stuff like that. And so the things that he says sometimes like, oh man, this is a lot. And am I up to this? Do I have enough wisdom and guidance to offer him? So the conversations, they're weighty. They're difficult, but I love it. I love the season that my kids are in, the blessings that come along with that, the challenges that come along with that. So my first encouragement to you tonight is simply this. Love the blessings of the season that you're in. Treasure those things. And then when you move on to the next season, you don't need to grieve. Now, it's sad when you move on from one season to the next. I mean, I miss my kids as little babies and kissing their pudgy little cheeks and, having kids that actually enjoyed my company instead of going into their room as soon as they walk. Like, I miss that season. But when you learn to treasure every season of your kid's life, you don't have to be super bummed out as the calendar changes. Because what you know is the next season that's coming along, that's going to have its own blessings and its own challenges. And I'm so much looking forward to that. Does that make sense? So that's my first encouragement to you tonight. I want to introduce my family to you. I also need to check my text. I'm sorry. My youngest daughter and my wife right now are at a show choir competition. Does anybody know what show choir is? Philip had no idea when I was like, you know what show choir is? No, you weren't. Where did you grow up? Okay, Nebraska. It's big in Nebraska. It's big in Nebraska. It's big in Iowa. It's big in Missouri. Apparently it is not big in Colorado. So it's like 25 minutes of singing and dancing with like 48 kids. So Are there videos somewhere of you? My daughters are huge into show choir, and they're at a competition right now, and they're waiting for their awards tonight. So let me introduce my family. So this is my family. That's my wife to my left. Her name's Tara. This is our daughter Ryan. She's our youngest. She's 15. She'll be 16 this summer. So she's a freshman, and she's 5'11". She's the tallest one in our family. But she is our most sensitive one. She is extremely compassionate, extremely soft-hearted, and we have to have a lot of conversations in our house about balancing the good and the bad that comes along with that. Like it's great to be soft-hearted, it's great to be compassionate, it's great to care so much, but you can't wear your heart on the outside of your body. Like you've got to be a little bit more resilient because she feels everything so deeply. But that's my daughter Ryan. She's awesome. This is my daughter Adeline. Adeline is so. So we have a joke in our house that our kids are like the Wizard of Oz, because Ryan, she's all heart, but sometimes she needs to think things through a little bit more. Okay, third child. My daughter Adeline, she's all brain, and I have to exhort her sometimes. Like it's okay to have a heart. It's okay to be a little bit compassionate and a little bit like. I know you didn't intend to sound as mean as you were, but that's how it came off. So, but she is a delight. She is like me. She is my mini me. And she's a freshman in college this year. Very talented, very musical. She's going into music education. And I miss her a lot. I miss her a lot when she's away at college because she and I are just very, very similar to each other. And then this is my son, Logan, over there. He's a sophomore in college. He is a sophomore at Ozark, actually, where I teach. And Logan, as our firstborn, now Logan is on the autism spectrum, very, very mild. But Logan has always struggled quite a bit with social anxiety. He's just social interactions are kind of more difficult for him than other kids. And that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to talk about this evening is just some of the different parenting approaches that we've had to adopt with each one of our three kids and the particular needs that they have. But Logan's doing great. Logan's awesome. And he's, because of some of his own issues that he's had through the years, he's actually grown pretty interested in counseling and pastoral care because he himself has benefited so much from just the interaction that he's had with people in his life. And so that's kind of how his heart is growing. So that's my three kids. Now, not pictured, my wife and I are very involved in the student ministry at our church. We've been at our church for about 20 years now. And I've been involved in the student ministry of our church for about 15 of those 20 years. My wife has been involved since we got there, all 20 years. And I always tell people my wife is the best youth minister I've ever met, but she's never made a dime from being a youth minister. So what our church does is we have D groups where kids, by their grade level, meet together once a week. And that same group of kids goes from 5th grade all the way through 12th grade together. And ideally, we want them to have the same D group leader for all of those years. My wife has done that cycle 3 times, where she's taken 5th graders all the way up to graduation, and then she'll come back and start it all over again. Matter of fact, this year, she just started, she was with my daughter's age group, and this year, her and her best friend just started another group of 5th graders. And she's like, I'm close to 50 years old. 5th graders they grow weirder by the day, and they're stinky, and they're awkward, but she loves it. She's so good at it. She knows much more. She should actually be here talking because she knows so much more about this than I do. And it's actually pretty cool, the girls that she's discipled through the years, and now they're having kids of their own, and they're asking my wife for parenting advice and how do I raise this kid in the Lord. And it's the most rewarding thing that we've ever done in ministry, is sticking with these kids. I've only done the cycle once, okay? I'm not as tough as my wife. But I did a cycle from 5th grade all the way to 12th grade with my son's class. And we started in 5th grade, and I'll tell you, y'all, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in ministry, is sitting there with 5th graders on a Wednesday night after they just got done with school, and they are all hopped up, and they will not sit down for more than 30 seconds, and all you want to do is tell them just one thing about Jesus so that you can call it a good night. But those boys, I love those boys. And those boys are now men, and they're a part of my life. And again, it's the most challenging but the most rewarding thing that I've done in ministry, to actually help these young boys grow into godly men. And so I say all that because parenting, obviously, it starts in the home, but hopefully as a community of believers, it's also that same type of discipling is happening in our communities as well. And I have some more that I want to say about that here in a second. Okay, so talking about the middle school years, some of this stuff is going to be obvious to you, stuff that you already knew, stuff that you probably already thought about, but there are a few things that make the middle school years unique. So one of the things that is noteworthy about the middle school years is that kids are famously awkward during these years, physically awkward. Their bodies are growing in ways that they haven't grown before. And what makes the middle school years even more challenging is that kids are growing at different rates. So my daughter, almost 6 foot tall, her best friend, who's a boy, up until this year, now they're in high school, he's finally hitting his growth spurt, but for their entire childhood, pretty much, he was a full head shorter than she was. And it made her feel awkward, and it made him feel awkward. And the middle school years are kind of famous for just being physically awkward. Like I said, this can be wildly inconsistent from one child to the next. So along with the physical awkwardness, it's also a time of social experimentation. Preteens will try new things, including new activities, new looks, new relationships, even a new language. Any of you with middle schoolers in your house, you know what I'm talking about. Like, they use words in ways that don't make no sense, okay? And part of that has always been the case about this particular age group. Because you think about it, they're entering into 5th grade, 6th grade, junior high, and they're starting to socially transition away from being just little kids. So the adults in their life are starting to look at them a little bit differently, but they're starting to look at themselves differently too. And so they're not old enough certainly to launch out in full independence, but they want to start experimenting with that. They want to start experimenting, like, what is my identity separate from my parents, separate from my siblings? Like, who am I really? And so they'll engage in all sorts of experience. Like, this is the age where they'll go through a season, or they'll go through a fad of just wearing really weird clothes. Like, what's wrong with you? And part of it is they're just experimenting. They're trying to find, like, what is their thing? What is their identity going to be? And so if your kid is like in one of those phases or in one of those fads, one of the things that you probably shouldn't do is panic about that, because you just need to realize that most of the time they're just experimenting and just trying to find their way, because that's typical of this age group. They also, and this is one of the things that we've experienced in our home, and it's been kind of painful, but there's a lot of social experimentation too. There's a lot of sorting during this time period, but especially when you enter into 8th grade, 9th grade, there's a lot of friend group sorting that happens. kids that you grew up with, playing with, having sleepovers with, all of a sudden they're out of your life. Like my daughter, my youngest daughter, Ryan, she had a very close friend who lived 2 doors down. They did everything together until they got into about the 8th grade year. And then for some reason, and I asked her, like, what happened? And they can't even put their finger on what happened. They just went 2 totally different directions. They have 2 different friend groups. They're involved in different activities. They're friendly to each other, but they're not even friends anymore. And that's fairly typical of this age group. There's gonna be some social transitions that happen, and sometimes there's some pain that comes along with that. Growing curiosity. This is when abstract reasoning really starts to develop. Worldview starts to coalesce. In other words, your preteen is going to start to think more deeply about their life in this world. Now, they're not always going to have the categories to think those things through well, but your preteen, you've probably, those of you with preteens in your house, you've probably already noticed this. They will start to ask different types of questions than they asked when they were in elementary school. Deeper questions that have a longer, what I would call a longer horizon to them. So when you reach this age period, you start to think more abstractly about your life and also about the future. And so one of the things as parents that we have to do is kind of shepherd them through that process without stifling their curiosity, without being scared of their curiosity, or heaven forbid, lecturing them in their curiosity. What they need is actually shepherds and guides as they're starting to ask some of these questions, so that they know you're a safe person that they can talk to. And then responsibility and participation. There's a sense that they aren't little kids anymore. They may begin to engage in debate. They may want to earn money. Any of you going through that season right now, where when kids enter into like junior high or late grade school, do you have junior high here, or do you have middle? What do they call it? Middle school. Okay. It's actually fairly typical that a lot of kids will be like, they'll become really zeroed in on, I want an allowance. I want to earn some money. Because they want to flex a little bit of their independence. They like this idea that we can go to the store, and if I see that candy that I want, I actually have some money that I can buy that candy for myself. Some middle schoolers will start to exercise more responsibility around the house. Now, some of you are like, well, whose kids are those? But they will grow a sense of place and purpose. They'll want to participate in the house in a different way. Now, obviously, we'll still have frustrations about their enthusiasm to participate in things around the house. But that's one of the transitions that they'll start to go through in these middle school years, is that there will be, along with their growing curiosity, they don't really want to be treated as little kids anymore. They want to start to, and so one of the things as parents that you can do to encourage this is actually start giving them more responsibilities, because this is the way that they're wired anyway. So start giving them more responsibilities. Start giving them, start paying them for certain chores that they do around the house, giving them an allowance or something like that. Start a savings account with them. Like this is the prime age to do some of those things, because they're naturally inclined to want to explore this new age that they're entering into. So take advantage of that. Take advantage of that by empowering them in that way. A friend of mine wrote a book. This is actually one of the professors at Ozark. She wrote a book this past year called Raising Disciples. And she's taught children's ministry for decades at this point. She's the smartest person that I know when it comes to children's ministry. And she wrote a book on raising disciples, where she kind of walks through each season of a child's life and just what that season needs in regards to parenting and discipleship. And this is what she said about the preteen years in particular. She said, though they have not fully entered into adolescence, preteens begin to practice for adulthood as they imagine their future identities. He isn't yet independent, but he desperately wants to be. She tries to live and make decisions in emulation of those a few years older, but she isn't quite mature enough for those situations. And as these emerging teenagers reach this milestone in their discipleship, they are making decisions that will affect the trajectory of their path. As preteens are in the process of identity formation, champion God's call on their lives to become more like Christ by loving God and loving others well. So what Teresa is bringing out in this book is she's combining, I should say, the natural developmental process of a preteen and our discipleship task as parents, raising disciples. So in this season of life that your child is in, there are some unique opportunities and some unique responsibilities to raise them into the likeness of Christ. Some of these things I'm going to come. By the way, so I'm going to talk for about, like Philip said, I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, take a break. After the break, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This first section, I'm talking about mostly like what my wife and I have learned about raising disciples as middle school students. But in the second half, I'm going to talk about the world in which your child lives. Because I think a big part of like parenting in this day and age is learning to understand the nature of this day and age. Like what is the world that your kid is living in? Because the world that your kid is living in is different than the world that you were living in when you were a 5th grader, 6th grader, 7th grader. Like for instance, I'm looking at this quote right here. When I was in 5th grade, I still remember this very vividly. My next door neighbor, his name was Nick Brissett. And Nick and I, every summer, we would get on our bikes. Now, this sounds like a Gen X cliche, but it's true. I'm sorry, it's just true. During the summer, Nick and I would get on our bikes, and we lived in this very, very large like subdivision of our city. We would get on our bikes, and we wouldn't see our parents the rest of the day. We would ride everywhere. We would go up to the store. We would buy baseball cards with our own money that we had earned through our allowance. We would come back home. We would trade baseball cards. We would do everything. And I try to reflect back on that. Like, I don't even remember where my parents were those summers. Like, I'm sure they were around. I'm positive they're around, but I have no memory of ever interacting with my parents. I just remember me and Nick just out every single day. And in this sweet spot of like 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, like that's what we did. That's not the world that my kids grew up in. I don't know about yours. Like our kids aren't growing up in the same type of world where they're out there just exploring on their own. Now everything is very carefully coordinated and overseen, and we've got to be safe. And I'm not criticizing that necessarily. I'm just pointing out that times have certainly changed. And as parents in this day and age, we have to be savvy about and understand the world in which our kids are growing up. And that's, I think, going to help us as parents. Okay, my best friend is a youth minister. He's been a youth minister for about 30 years. And when Philip and I first started talking about me coming out here, the first person that I talked to was my friend. His name's Chad, too. And I asked him, I'm like, Chad, you've been doing youth ministry for a long time. So tell me, what is the most important thing that parents need to know about their middle schoolers? What's the most important thing? And he very quickly sent me a text like this long, okay? But he summarized it in these 3 points. He said, from my perspective as a youth minister for 3 decades now, there is no more significant season of a child's life than those middle school years, especially when it comes to their faith. In those years, more than any other years, their faith is going to start to become much more personal to them. Because you saw the previous slide, they're growing in curiosity. They're learning to ask abstract questions. A part of that, if they're growing up in the church, a part of that is they're going to start to wonder about this Jesus person. They're going to start to wonder about their faith. And this is an extremely formative season. Now, when I get them, when they're college students, they're going through a similar season. So college students, if they grew up in the church, about the end of the high school career, beginning of college career, that's when the serious questions of faith start to bubble up. And that's why I love getting to do what I do, talking to college students, because I get them right at that sweet spot where they're starting to ask all these really good questions. In the 5th grade year, 6th grade year, junior high, it's in this time period where they're not questioning their faith so much as they're building their faith, where they're making it their own. So obviously, as parents, we have a huge responsibility in this season. So he said there's really 3 questions that parents need to reflect on. The first question is the identity question. Who am I? Who am I? This is a question that every middle schooler is asking in some way, shape, or form. Who am I? Now, can I go off on a tangent here real quick? I want to be mindful of the time. I'll try to be brief. So the identity question is the foundational question. Who am I really? And in the middle school years, they're really starting to ask that question. Who am I? And the problem is, and this is going to be getting into some of the stuff I'm going to say in the second half of our time, the answers that our culture is giving to that question are actually fueling anxiety, fueling all sorts of mental illness. Because, and again, I'll get into this in the second half, kids aren't getting any solid answers to this. When you have 4 out of every 10 kids in our country born into homes without 2 parents, they're born into instability. Now, it doesn't mean a single parent home has to be a bad home or anything like that. It just means there's additional challenges that come along with being a single parent home. Because the primary identity shaper for a child is the family. Every one of us in this room, if we pause and reflect long enough and we ask ourselves this question, who am I uniquely as an individual? One of the very first answers that we will give in asking that question is, I am who I am because of who I'm a part of. Because of my family upbringing. For better or sometimes for worse, I am shaped by my family. So, as in the process of raising disciples, here's the point. One of the things that we must give our middle school children is we must give them a stable sense of identity. This is who you are. My best friend, his mantra that he tells his kids this, he's such a good dad. He tells his kids this nonstop. He says, you are known, valued, and loved. That is his mantra that he instills in his kids. He instills that in his youth group. You are known, valued, and loved. I will never love you any less because of a bad thing that you've done or any more because of a good thing that you've done. Like, I love you totally. You are known, valued, and loved. What he wants to do is he wants to instill a sense of identity in his kids and in his youth group to where they know no matter what life does, ups, downs, in between, I know who I am. I know who I am, and I know who I belong to. So the very first thing as parents that we need to think about is giving our kids a stable sense of identity. This is who you are. I'm rambling too much, but I got into a little bit of trouble this past week because we had a lot of snow in Joplin, and my son has this job at gas station, QT. And I really wanted him to call off because he has this little Honda. It's not built for the snow. It's like, it's stupid. It's a gas station job. I just wanted him to call off. So I called him up. I'm like, son, you probably don't need to go into work today. Just call off. And he actually turned this around on me and he said, well, Dad, you just told me, because we just had this conversation. It's like, Dad, you just told me that Ragsdales show up when nobody else shows up. Dang it. Because we had just had that conversation. I took him aside and we just had a father-son conversation where I'm like, son, this is what men do. Men have responsibility. Men have enough character to show up when nobody else shows up. And that's what Ragsdale men do. Like I was feeling myself, right? Like that's what Ragsdale men do. And then like he threw that back on my face. It's like, I can't call off because this is what Ragsdale men do. They show up. I'm like, all right, well, I'll be there to pick you up after your shift then. But I also loved that because what that told me is my son has a sense of identity. He doesn't have to wonder who he is. He knows who he is. His grandparents have given him a sense of identity. He calls my mom and dad, I'm not making this up, my son calls my mom and dad literally every single night. Every night. And every single night, they have a devotion and a prayer together. I mean, how many 20-year-olds do this with their grandparents? Every single night, we're on vacation, Yellowstone National Park, he's in the camper calling grandma and grandpa. I can't tell you how much I love that because I know that kid, he knows who he is. He knows what his identity is. He is known, valued, and loved. Where do I fit? Where do I fit? This is not just who I am, but who do I belong to? Where do I fit? And middle schoolers, like I said, they're trying to answer that question. And it'll take them a little while to answer that question. That's why they're going to experiment with all sorts of sports and activities. And eventually I pray, Lord, help my children to find their thing. Have you ever prayed that prayer for your kids? I want them to find their thing. I don't even care what the thing is. Well, I do kind of care. I mean, hopefully it's not like dealing drugs, but I just like, is it music? That's great. Is it sports? That's great. I just want them to find something that they're passionate about, that they're enthusiastic about. I want them to find their thing. And in this season of life, they're going to experiment with a lot of stuff. My daughter Adeline is the least athletic kid in the world, and we still joke around with her about that one year that she played soccer in 6th grade. It was hilarious. It was so funny because she was so bad. But we loved that she tried, that she was just trying to find out like what was her thing. And eventually she found out that it was music, and that was great. What am I good at? That's also, like I said, that feeds into the belonging question. Where do I fit? But also, what am I passionate about? What am I good at? These are 3 questions that we need to help our kids process through during the season of life. Specifically, as disciples, we need to help them process through this. All right. I'm being long-winded, so I need to move on. We need to challenge our kids to ask a better question. I'm going to put on my academic dean hat for a second if I could, because this is literally a talk that I give parents all the time. And I tell parents this. I'm like, hey, the what do you want to be when you grow up question, that's a great question. Don't stop asking that question. It's fine, okay? From the minute that kids are like in preschool, we're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the answer to that question changes through the years, I remember when I was in 4th grade, I was going to be Michael Jordan. I was going to be an NBA basketball player. The only thing that I got right was the haircut, okay? It's not a bad question. It actually helps your kid to think through their passions. What are they good at? What do they enjoy doing? It's a good question. But it also is a question that puts a ton of pressure on them, especially as they enter into junior high and really into high school. It puts a ton of pressure on them because it makes them think as a 16-year-old, I have to have my whole life figured out right now as a 16-year-old? What, are you kidding me? Like, that's a ton of pressure. And so one of the things I tell parents is a better question to ask your kids is, who do you want to be? Not what do you want to be when you grow up, as if your life is just about entering into some economic machine and making money. Like that. No, your life is more important than that. Your life is more significant than that. I tell my son is like, he's 20. He's like the average 20-year-old. Like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. And I'm like, son, you know what? Honestly, I don't care as long as you love and serve Jesus. I don't care. Because I desperately want you to be a particular kind of person. I want you to be a particular kind of person. I want you to be a person of virtue. I want you to be a person of faithfulness. I want you to be a person who loves. Like, that's the kind of person that I want you to be. All the other stuff will kind of take care of itself. If you want to work at the gas station the rest of your life, I can live with that, as long as you are a particular kind of person. I think in the talks that we give as parents, we actually need to pivot towards character. We need to pivot towards virtue. And we need to communicate to our kids that there are more important things than just like, when you grow up, you're going to make a lot of money and this is what you're going to do when you grow up. Like, there's more important things than that. And so having the character conversation, I think, is a more important conversation than the career conversation. All right. Some traps to avoid, just really quick. And, I've seen parents fall into both of these traps. One trap is formulaic parenting, which implies that children are machines. So you just, basically, parenting is like a mathematical formula. A plus B equals C. Input equals output. So I'm going to read a bunch of mommy blogs. I'm going to read as many books as possible, and they're going to crack the code and give me the secret for how to be a great parent and how to raise great kids. And many of you are smiling because you know it's not that simple. It's messy. There is no formula for this because kids aren't machines. But the opposite of that is what's sometimes called anarchic parenting, which implies that children don't actually exist. So you have a fifth grader, but you're giving them all the rights and responsibilities of a full-grown adult. Like, you don't actually parent them in an appropriate way according to what they need as a fifth grader. You're almost acting as if childhood doesn't even exist. And there's a lot of anarchic parenting that's going on nowadays too. Both of these are traps that we need to avoid. Okay, so this is the last thing I want to talk about. Just some lessons that we learned. I'm not, I just warned you against formulaic parenting. I'm not about trying to give you a formula for being a good parent. What I just want to share with you are some things that I've learned through the years as a parent. My wife and I have learned as parents and also as sponsors in our youth group. These are some things that we've learned, some lessons that we've learned, okay? The first lesson up here is pray for your kids and pray for their friends. So I put two pictures up here. This is a picture of my beautiful daughter, Adeline, and her D group at high school graduation last year. I asked each of my three kids, I asked them, talk to Dad. What made the most difference to you growing up in your faith? I wanted to know. What was it? What made the most difference to you? It's a good question for a parent to ask every once in a while. All three of my kids, they each had a little bit different answers, but the one commonality that all three of my kids had was that what made the most difference was growing up with peers who were walking in faith themselves. They never felt like they were alone. They always felt, now this is Dad's word, they always felt like they had fellow travelers. And so my wife and I, we pray, every parent should be praying for their kids, but we also prayed for their friends. And my wife and I, one of the reasons that we got really involved in the youth group is because we wanted to be very involved in our kids' friends' life. I coached football, not because I know a ton about football, but because I wanted to know the boys that my son was growing up with. My wife, she's at a show choir competition. She'll be there from 5 a.m. till 1 a.m, all day long. The reason that she does it, she loves being around teenagers, but she also wants to be around my daughter's friends. This top picture is literally an answer to prayer. So that's my son on the right. My son, I told you, he struggles with some social anxiety. He's a very quiet kid. And making friends for him was always a challenge. And so my wife and I, we agonized. Like, Logan needs a crew. Every boy needs a crew. Logan needs a crew. He needs brothers to have his back. And he just didn't have that. And so we prayed and we prayed and prayed. And finally, something clicked. His 9th grade year, actually, something clicked where all of a sudden he had these godly friends in his life. And he had a godly mentor. That's the second from the left. His name's Patrick. I'll talk about him more in a second. And this made all the difference in the world to my son. Pray for your kids. Pray for their friends. Invest in their friends. Every kid is different, and also every kid is also the same. So what I mean by that is every kid has some of the same needs. But one of the things that I've tried to do as a parent is identify what special thing makes each one of my kids unique. And I want them to have a little treasure that only they have. The other kids don't have, but only they have it. So my son, it's sports. Sports are our thing. My oldest daughter, I tell her all the time, she's my music kid. I'll talk about music with her all day long. My youngest daughter, she's my movie kid and my spicy food kid. So she's very adventurous. She'll eat anything. She'll sit down and watch movies with me when my other two kids won't. And so each one of those, like I try to identify something special. This is something special just with me and you. Your brother and sister, they don't get it, but you do. Because I want to recognize that each one of my kids has unique needs and they need a unique parenting style to fit those needs. And I would encourage you to think about the same thing. I like this metaphor. Raising disciples can feel a little bit like GPS. So we've all had that experience, right? Of trying to get from A to B, and we don't exactly follow the GPS's suggestions, so we turn right where we should have turned left, and what does the GPS start doing? It'll recalculate, right? It'll show you the right way to go. I feel like parenting is that way a lot of times. We have a destination in mind. We want our kids to grow into the likeness of Christ. We have a destination in mind. Our kids are not always going to follow the most efficient path to that destination. And our kids, if we have 3 kids in the house, they might follow 3 different paths. So as a parent, part of my job is to pay attention to what's going on in their life and recalibrate their direction. If they're going over here, let me meet you over here and show you the way to Jesus from over here. So as a parent, we've got to be flexible enough and adjustable enough to meet our kids where they're at and show them the way to Jesus wherever they happen to be. All right. Involvement is non-negotiable. In our house, involvement was, we didn't negotiate involvement in church stuff. We just, again, Ragsdale show up. We were there. And my kids knew we're going to be there. Okay? And I know life is busy. Life is hectic. There's a lot of other priorities. But I got to tell you, like, growing up in the church, again, my kids have told me, has been the most important thing to them. And so growing up in a home where that was the expectation, that was our habit. All of a sudden now my 2 kids are in college. You know what I love? I love that they still have the same habits. My daughter, my 19-year-old daughter, her and her friends canceled plans for a whole weekend. They were going to go to Silver Dollar City, which is this theme park in Branson. They were going to go there, have a great time. They were going to go on Sunday. I didn't love that they were going to go on Sunday, but she's 19, so I'm like, okay. They're going to go on Sunday. I show up to church that evening. We have Advent services at church that evening. Her and her entire crew comes walking in, sits down in the front row in the church. Bunch of 19-year-old kids. And I asked Daddy, I thought you were going to be gone today. Well, we got together and we decided that it was more important for us to be at Advent tonight than it was at Silver Dollar City. So we just changed our plans. And it's an anecdote, but it meant so much to me because I'm like, okay, I did something right. That this girl, she recognizes that actually there's some priorities, there's some habits that are healthy for us to keep. Create rituals and traditions. I promise you I'll stop here in just a second. Create rituals and traditions. This is So this is I love these pictures. Okay, so this is 2016. This is this last October. My son and I have a tradition. After the last Cubs game of the season, we go to Waffle House together. No matter what time the game gets over, no matter what day it is, we have a standing appointment. We will go to Waffle House together, okay? It all began in 2016 when the Cubs won the World Series. And baseball is huge in our house. This kid is a Cubs fanatic, has baseball cards memorized, has games memorized. I mean, he's crazy that way. So this was 2:30 in the morning. We're at Waffle House because the game got over super late. So we went to Waffle House, and I told my son, I'm like, this is our new tradition. So for the last 9 years, every single year, we have this ritual. Now, it's silly, but can I tell you, it's meaningful. We have kids that are growing up without the stability of rituals in their life. Rituals and habits have a way of grounding us in the world. But we kind of are growing up in a ritual-less society where rituals are kind of fading away. And so I would encourage you, give your kids roots. Can I give you another one? So every year, Christmas Eve, everybody has their Christmas rituals, right? For us, Christmas Eve, we get together, we have Papa Murphy's pizza, and we have hot Dr. Pepper with lemon. Don't hate it if you haven't tried it. Have any of you tried it? Just put it on a stovetop, hot Dr. Pepper, fresh lemon, it'll change your life, okay? Now, that's a silly little thing. One year I tried to get pizza other than Papa Murphy's pizza. My kids rebelled. Now, isn't that interesting though? Like we defend our traditions, especially around Christmas and the holidays. We defend them. Even like teenagers defend those traditions tooth and nail. You know why? It's because they want rituals and traditions give us roots. They make us feel like we're a part of a people, we're a part of a place. Like, give your kids rituals, sacred times, sacred places, sacred people. One author that I read calls them focal things and focal practices. Every family is going to be different, but identify some sacred times, sacred people, sacred places for your family to give them that sense of stability and rootedness. This is a good book, by the way. I wish I would have read this book when my kids were young. It's just a brief little advertisement. It's a good book worth picking up. It's a quick read. It's just a book that encourages parents to think through the various daily habits of the household. Habits around meal times, habits around bedtime. It was a helpful book even to read with older teenagers. So it's worth checking out. I'm going to skip past this. Well, I'll just mention why this is here. So 73% retention rates among evangelicals by their kids when they grow into adulthood. They remain Christians. And that's actually not bad. So 73% are still affiliated with their faith by the time they get old. Most social scientists will say one of the reasons why other faiths here, 87%. Social scientists will say that one of the reasons for this is because other faiths tend to do a much better job instilling cultural and family traditions and rituals around their faith. So Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, like most non-Christian religions, even Catholicism is better at this, although their retention rate isn't super great. They tend to make their faith a cultural reality for the family. This is who we are, in other words. And because that's their identity, it's not something that they quickly abandon as soon as they reach adulthood. Because it's not just something my family kind of dabbled in. No, it's actually who we are as a family. And so there's traditions and rituals that surround that. Okay, last few things. Surround yourself and your kids with godly adults. My kids, 2 of my 3 kids mentioned this directly. They said, we loved growing up in an environment where there were other adults who also loved Jesus and who taught us how to love Jesus. It's painful to admit, but sometimes as a parent, your voice is not clearly heard by your kids. But the voice of another adult is heard a little bit more clearly. So, like in my D group that I led with my son, I only assisted. The main leader was my friend Patrick, who actually doesn't have any kids himself. He and his wife Sammy were never able to have kids, so their kids are the kids in the youth group. And so Patrick has become my son's mentor. My son calls Patrick the minute that something bad or good happens in a life. Patrick's his first phone call. He'll go down, he lives down the street from us. He'll walk down the street and watch movies at Patrick's house with his buddies. So that, and I can't tell you how much of a blessing that is. Are there adults in your kid's life who also love Jesus and who also want them to be raised into the likeness of Christ? Raise your kids around godly adults. Let your kids see you serve. That's a really important thing. Let your kids see you putting your faith on display. Be safe for your kids while remaining distinct from them. My kids ask me all sorts of questions that I never would have dreamed asking my parents at the same age. Like, seriously, it's freaky, okay? And part of that is a generational thing. Like, this generation is much freer about the types of questions that they're asking. But I love the fact that apparently I am a safe enough person with my kids that they can come to me and ask questions. But I also, as their parent, I want them to know I'm not the same as you. Okay, I'm not one of your 15-year-old friends. I'm not one of your 18-year-old friends. I'm not the same as you, and actually that's a good thing. I have wisdom, I have experience, I have knowledge that you don't have. And so parents need to walk this line between I want to be safe enough that my kids will come to me and ask me important questions, but I also want to be distinct enough that they will get actual wisdom from me. And sometimes parents have a hard time navigating that tension. Sometimes it's like, well, we're not safe at all because we're so distinct, we're so different. But then there's other parents over here that like, oh, I want my kids to identify with me so much that actually I end up looking a lot like a kid in the process. So I want to navigate that tension between those two. And encourage anti-fragility. That's the last thing. And what I mean by anti-fragility, so this is a book worth picking up as well. It's for college students, okay? But it has a lot to do with kids at all ages. This is The Coddling of the American Mind, written by 2 non-believers. But it's talking about, one of the big things that it talks about in the book is that college students nowadays have been raised to think of themselves as fragile. And that fragility is actually hindering them. It's hampering their development in life. It's hampering their success. So what they talk about in the book is the need to instill what they call anti-fragility. In other words, you're stronger than you think you are. You're capable of doing more than what you think. So these are 4 kind of mantras in the Ragsdale house, okay? 4 things that when my kids hear them, they roll their eyes because they've heard them so much, okay? The first thing, emotions are real, but they may not be true. So kids feel a lot of emotions. I don't want to ever tell them your emotions aren't real. If you're sad, you're sad. If you're happy, you're happy. It's not up to me to tell you whether or not your emotions are real. If you're feeling what you're feeling, then it's real. But I also want to tell them your emotions aren't always a good guide to what is true. I have this conversation with my 15-year-old almost daily, where I have to remind her, I'm like, honey, I know this is what you're feeling, and I'm not trying to tell you that what you're feeling is wrong, but what you're feeling may not actually be true. So honey, I need you to think through. I want you to think about how you're feeling. I don't want you just to feel it. I want you to think about how you're feeling. And are your feelings telling you the truth? Obstacles, not excuses. This is my one with my son all the time. Because I told you, he had some obstacles. But I drilled this into him from the time that he was in middle school, really. I drilled in this because he would come, I'm not like every other kid. Dad, it's harder for me. Like he says that all the time, it's harder for me. I'm like, son, I know that. I know that. I know it's harder for you. But this is an obstacle. It's not an excuse. We don't make excuses. Because life isn't going to give you excuses. This is an obstacle that you have to overcome, and in overcoming obstacles, you will be stronger as a result. So we have obstacles, we don't have excuses. Responsibility, not empathy. Now that sounds harsh. No, we're supposed to be empathetic. I'm not so sure about that. Now that's maybe a side conversation that we could have. I think sympathy is a good thing. I'm not always convinced that empathy is a good thing. If you are suffering loss, for instance, okay? You're suffering loss. Empathy isn't always the most helpful and encouraging thing. Because if I'm suffering loss, I want someone to come alongside of me that's actually in that moment stronger than I am. I don't need somebody that's as big of a mess as I am. How is that helpful? Okay? I need someone to sympathy, sin means alongside of. I need someone to offer me sympathy, to come alongside of me and lend me their strength. So I think sympathy is proper. I think empathy can actually instill bad habits. And so what I want to encourage in my kids is, I want you to take responsibility. If you did something wrong, take responsibility for it. If you're encountering a challenge in your life, take responsibility for that challenge. Again, obstacles, not excuses. And then lastly, do hard things. Don't hesitate to do hard things. Even if you fail, failure is okay. What's not okay is not doing something because you're afraid. Do hard things. And dad might force you to do hard things if you don't want to, because this is the way that you're going to grow. All right, let's take like a 5-minute break. I kind of went longer. I'll go shorter the second half of things. But let's take a little break, get some refreshments if you want them. Let's take like 5 minutes or so, and we'll come back. So I forgot that I actually had one more point here that I wanted to make before I moved on to the second part, which is, encourage anti-fragility. But here's the last point: work on me and us. It's a general truism that whether it's a family or whether it's an organization or whatever, people will only raise to the highest level of maturity that's present. And so if you want to raise godly disciples, part of what that means is we need to pay attention to our own discipleship. Because if we want mature adults, if we want mature disciples, then we need to be mature examples of what that looks like. And so a part of, honestly, one of the things my wife and I have learned is a part of being a good parent is actually focusing on our own spiritual health, but also focusing on our own relationship. We took this class when my son was first born called Growing Kids God's Way. Have you ever heard of this? I don't remember anything from it, I promise. I don't remember a thing, except I do remember just this one thing. They talk about couch time. So you're sharing some looks. You remember couch time? So couch time was basically this idea like every couple, like when you get home from work or whatever, you need to spend some time, just the two of you, on the couch together without the kids. It doesn't have to literally be on a couch, but you need time, just the two of you. And it's actually okay for your kids to see you having couch time. It's a time that they're not invited to. They can observe it, but they're not invited to because they need to see mom and dad are paying attention to their relationship. And this relationship, the health of this relationship is going to establish the health of this family. And so I'm thankful for that lesson because I unapologetically will kick my daughter out of the living room. Like, no, you're not allowed to be here right now. You're not allowed to hang out with mom and dad because this is mom and dad time. And mom and dad need our time together, because we need to have a healthy relationship. Our job as parents is not just to be like, our only job is not parent. Our family is not, you'll hear me make this point tomorrow morning, like our family is not centered on you. You're not the center of this family. You're welcome into this family. You're an essential part of this family, but the family is not centered on you. The family is, first of all, centered on Jesus. Jesus is the center of the family, but what provides like the stabilizing force in this family is mom and dad's relationship. So we're going to make sure that this relationship is a good relationship. So good godly parents need to focus on their own discipleship, their own relationships, so that they are growing, so that they are mature, and so that their kids can grow into maturity as well. Edwin Freeman, he wrote a book many years ago called Failure of Nerve is the name of the book. But he talks about in this book, he's talking about families and organizations and the things that consistently challenge families and the types of things that consistently challenge organizations, okay? And one of the things that he identified as a persistent challenge to families and organizations is what he calls the data junkie, okay? Does this look familiar to anyone in the room? Okay, we had a different version. That's how old we are. So our version was older than this. What to expect when you're expecting, and there's a whole family of these books. There's all sorts of, there's literally, I tried to Google it, but there's like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of different like parenting blogs and websites, and there's no end of information out there available for you if you want it. And what Friedman points out is an obsession with data and technique that has become a form of addiction and turns professionals into data junkies and their information into data junkyards. As a result, decision makers avoid or deny the very emotional processes within their families, their institutions, and within society itself that might contribute to their institution's persistence of form. What he's saying there, let me translate what he's saying. What he's saying is we have this tendency when things get difficult, we think the solution to this is going to be found in reading another book, going to another parenting blog site, collecting as much data and information as possible. So this is a problem that could be solved by just collecting data, collecting information. And we do that to basically avoid the harder emotional work of parenting, the harder emotional work of leading a family or leading an organization. So we go to data like an addiction instead of leaning into the emotional problems that might actually be besetting our family. I want to, so this is my last slide. There's this principle that he talks about in the book called the oxygen mask principle. So on an airplane, we've all ignored those talks many times, where the flight attendant will tell you, if the oxygen mask drops down, what are you supposed to do as a parent? You put yours on first. Now, this is counterintuitive, right? Because as a parent, you want to protect your kids. You think, well, I should take care of my kids first. No, actually put yours on first, because then by putting yours on, you'll be thinking clearly enough to help your kid put theirs on, instead of the other way around. It's the oxygen mask principle. So children rarely succeed in rising above the maturity level of their parents. And this principle applies to all mentoring, healing, or administrative relationships. So the oxygen mask principle applies. So if you want maturity in your kids, you've got to grow in maturity yourself. If you want godliness in your kids, you've got to be growing in godliness yourself. If you want healthy relationships for your kids, you've got to be modeling healthy relationships yourself. If you want self-control and self-discipline for your kids, guess what? You've got to be growing in self-discipline and self-control yourself. It's the oxygen mask principle. Don't ask your kids to actually be more mature than you yourself are willing to be. And I know in youth ministry, this is often, I'll speak on your behalf, okay? So this is a frustration that a lot of youth ministers have, where parents will bring their kids to the church and they'll basically say, fix my kid, right? In the maybe hour a week that you get, right? Fix my kid. And it's not fair to our youth ministers. It's not fair to our churches. And it's just a bad parenting principle. Why would you expect the church to be able to fix your kid in 1 hour a week when the rest of the week they're seeing other behaviors modeled that actually challenge or go against the very things that they might be taught at church? So if we want our kids to grow up to look a certain way, that means we've got work to do on ourselves. And it's not selfish. It's not selfish to do that. It's not selfish to care about your own spiritual well-being. It's not selfish to care about your own relationships. It's not selfish at all, because by caring about yourself, you are going to be a better parent and you're going to have a healthier family. So have I ranted enough on that? Don't bring your kids to the youth minister and ask him to fix them, okay? Now, your youth minister wants to partner with you. That's what a good youth minister does, partner with parents, but it's a partnership. Okay. Next thing. So I want to talk about the world that your preteen is living in, okay? Some of this is going to be obvious to you. So I'm sure quite a bit of what I've already said has been obvious to you. But this is just based on the research that I've done, the experience that I've had. There's a lot that's going to go unsaid, but there's at least 3 different characteristics of your preteen's world that you need to be aware of, okay? If you're not already aware of it, you need to become aware of these things. So anxious, anesthetized, and post-Christian. Those are the 3 points that I want to make. So first of all, anxious. I'm a professor, so one of my favorite things to do is to recommend books, okay? But this of all the books that I've recommended tonight, this is the best one. This is by Jonathan Haidt. He also wrote the Coddling of the American Mind book too. This book came out just last year, I think, or maybe the year before. I think it was last year. So Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, and he's dedicated a lot of time and a lot of research to try to understand this one question. The question is, why is this youngest generation so emotionally unwell? It's trying to understand that question. It's beyond any doubt that this generation is more emotionally unwell than previous generations. In every available metric, this youngest generation, and there's not a lot known about Gen Alpha yet, which technically that's middle school students are in this new cohort that are calling Gen Alpha. We don't know a lot about them yet, but we do know quite a bit about Gen Z, the generation that just preceded them. And one of the things that we know about Gen Z is that they struggle with a lot of mental illness. And so Jonathan Haidt is trying to understand that. And he wrote this book called The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And here's the central, or the thesis of the book. He says, my central claim in this book is that these 2 trends, overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the virtual world, are the major reasons why children born after 1995 became the anxious generation. Now, 1995 is the important year. That's usually when Gen Z is said to have begun. And these dates are always somewhat arbitrary. But the reason 1995 was chosen is because that was the year Windows 95 came out. I'm old enough to remember that. Nick, you're not. Windows 95 was so important because Internet Explorer now was available on every personal computer that was bought after 1995. So the internet becomes ubiquitous. It's everywhere after 1995. So anybody born after 1995 literally doesn't remember life before the internet. So that's why Gen Z is kind of like that's when Gen Z began. Millennials, the older generation, some of them actually do have memories of a pre-internet age. Gen X, I had the wonderful blessing of growing up without the internet, and it was lovely. Great thing is you don't know what you're missing, when you're growing up without the internet. So the 2 things that he's talking about here: overprotection in the real world, underprotection in the virtual world. And this is the dominant theme of this book. So he's like, this generation, this younger generation, they were raised by parents that put their kids literally on tethers. So this was the bike helmet generation. Nothing against bike helmets, okay? They're fine. But this was like, you're not going to do anything unless it's safe. In the book, he talks about even like recess. Any teachers in here? Any teachers? Okay. So he actually observes how recess has changed through the years. Like recess at a lot of schools, now everything is overseen by an adult. The games are overseen by an adult. Whereas previous generations, they were sent out in the schoolyard like a pack of wild animals, like figure it out for yourself, okay? And if somebody falls down when you're playing flag football and skins their knee, it's not the end of the world. We don't have to end the game. We just rub some dirt on it and move on. Even if there's a fight on the playground, the kids will kind of officiate that fight on their own without an adult always there. But this generation grew up with an adult always there, always. In all circumstances, there is an adult there. I see this as a college student. So I have 21, 22, 23-year-old college students. And their expectation of the adults on campus is that we should be overseeing to all of their needs. Every need that they have, there needs to be an adult there to provide for them. Food, transportation, it doesn't matter. Like everything, like signing up for classes. I need an adult to actually sign me up for classes. Like that's the expectation of college students today who grew up in a hyper protective environment where they're always like all play is carefully officiated, right? All play is carefully overseen. Parents are getting arrested in various parts of our country for letting their kids walk to the corner to go to the Dollar General. This happened in Tennessee just recently. There was a mom hauled off in front of her kid in handcuffs because she let her 9-year-old walk a half mile down the street to Dollar General on their own. And she was arrested for this, for negligence. So what Jonathan Haidt talks about in the book is like he wants to bring back what's called free range parenting, where it's not that parents are negligent, but parents intentionally throughout the various years of their child's life, there will be certain freedoms that are unlocked with every birthday. So your kid knows when I turn 13, this is what I now get to do as a 13-year-old. When I turn 15, here's what I get to do as a 15-year-old. So he advocates like parents actually having the conversation of like building those benchmarks into your kid's development so that they know with every birthday there's additional responsibilities, but there's also additional freedoms that come along with every birthday. So that they're not going to college as a 22-year-old and they literally don't know how to function because they've never had those responsibilities. Now, on the other hand, he talks about underprotection in the virtual world. Growing up on screens. So how many parents do we know? Now, we don't need to point fingers, but how many parents do we know that these are like overprotective parents, right? Like these are the types of parents that never let their kids out of their sight, but they're also the type of parents that will put a smartphone in front of their kid's face when they're 4 years old, and that phone becomes their babysitter. Every waking moment, there's a screen in front of, it's basically their pacifier. So we're using screens to pacify our kids, and it starts very young, and it doesn't stop as the kids grow up and go through middle school and eventually high school and college. And we're just this is why he calls it the rewiring of childhood. Because kids, what they're learning is, in my physical life, I'm very fragile. But in the virtual world, there's no rules. And so they're becoming addicted to screens, addicted to the digital realm, whereas in the physical realm, they're becoming much more cautious and fearful. And so this is creating what Jonathan Haidt calls the anxious generation, a generation that is much more comfortable literally huddling around a screen than actually being out there in the world. It's a really fascinating book. I'd encourage you to pick it up and read it. And there's a lot of data that he uses to support his conclusions. Here's some of the data. And you've seen charts like this before. Major depression among teenagers. Now you see girls are in worse shape than boys. I'll read this to you because I know it's small. Girls, there's been a 145% increase since 2010. 145%. Boys, there's also been a big increase, 161% since 2010, but boys are starting from a lower baseline than girls are. Now, he puts this from 2010 to 2014, he puts that shaded in gray because this is when Gen Z goes to college. So Gen Z goes to college between 2010 and 2015. And you see all of these numbers start to spike during that time period. And the thesis is this is the smartphone generation. This is the generation that grew up on screens. They grew up being overprotected by their parents, but underprotected on screens. And so when they go to college, their mental health starts to fall apart. So depressive symptoms go up. Suicide rates for younger adolescents. This is also really small, but 2010 to 2015 is highlighted right here. See how it spikes in the same exact time period? You have a spike going on as Gen Z is going to college. Satisfied with myself. This is actually the second word, anesthetized. So you know what an anesthesia is, right? An anesthesia is a numbing agent. It makes us numb to the world. This generation not only is anxious, but along with that, they've been anesthetized. They've been numbed to the world. So here's some evidence of this. Are you satisfied with yourself? Now, on this one, boys are a little bit worse than girls. Now, I will say this, and this is one of the things I always talk about when it comes to technology. If you have a preteen girl, you need to recognize the rules are a little bit different for a preteen girl than they are a preteen boy. They just are, okay? All the data that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of data, screens, especially social media, has a much more devastating effect on preteen girls than it does on boys. Partly because boys aren't using social media as much as girls. Like my son, my 20-year-old son, he has an Instagram, but he's never on it. My two daughters, though, they finally did get Instagram, only after some significant negotiation with their father. They had to wait until they were 16. My youngest daughter doesn't have it yet. My oldest daughter does. So in our house, the rule is you got to be 16 before you get social media. And so here's what the data says. I'll just tell you what the data says. You do with it whatever you want. The data says the more time that you spend on social media as an adolescent girl, the more depressive and anxious you will feel. The data also says that if you are already predisposed to poor mental health, social media will have a much more dramatic effect. Kids that are already pretty well adjusted, the data seems to indicate that social media doesn't impact them very significantly at all. So that's why they say wait until you're 16. Wait until you have a little bit better sense of who you are, what your identity is. You're a little bit more self-confident. You're a little bit more mature. Because if you're well and you use social media, it doesn't tend to have a dramatic effect. But if you go to social media basically as therapy, like you go to social media to try to make yourself feel better because you're feeling bad about yourself, what all the data says is you will end up feeling much, much worse, especially if you're a girl. Boys, they tend to do YouTube, they do Twitch, they do video games. It's just kind of different for boys. But satisfied with yourself. You see the numbers start going down about that same time period, 2010 to 2015. Life often feels meaningless. percent of high school seniors who agreed or mostly agreed with the statement that life often feels meaningless. You see the same spike that happens around that same time period. Now, isn't that interesting? We have girls and boys growing up in the most affluent society in the history of civilization. And that's not an overstatement. That is literally true. There has never been a generation of young people that enjoys as much affluence, as much comfort, and as much entertainment as this generation. They're all walking around with supercomputers in their pockets. But yet they're all telling you, or not all, many of them, a significant portion of them are telling you that life feels meaningless. There's a lesson there. There's a lesson there that we need to pay attention to. All the gadgets and entertainment and information in the world doesn't seem to make us fulfilled. In fact, it might actually be having the opposite effect, making us feel emptier, especially young people. Here's just some other scary data. Depression by level of social media use. And again, same sort of idea. Girls, you see a spike there. Boys, not nearly as big of a spike, but with girls, it's pretty significant. Teens who are heavy users of social media are more depressed than light users and non-users, especially for girls. Daily time with friends by age group. You see this just tanks for ages 15 to 24. See how that just goes into the toilet. About that same time. And what Jonathan Haidt has talked about this, another author, Jean Twenge, she's talked a lot about this too, that kids just aren't hanging out together nearly as much as they used to in the same physical space. They're not going to the movies. They're not going to the mall. They're not just going over to each other's houses and hanging out. Now, one of the byproducts of that is they're getting in less trouble. So teen pregnancy is way down, which is a good thing. Teen alcohol use is way down because those are social things, you understand. I mean, I'm Gen X. I remember house parties growing up in high school where shenanigans were taking place, okay? But if kids are never hanging out, if kids are never getting together, then some of those things aren't happening. But that's a false, that's fool's gold. I'm not convinced that that's something that we should just be celebrating. I think we should also see that that's also a symptom of something else that's happening, which is that kids aren't spending a lot of time in the same space. And spending time in the same space is critical for our social and emotional development. And I think we did a lot of damage to kids over COVID because we basically told them that that's okay. And actually, that's better than okay. That's safe. It's safer just to be by yourself. What a horrible message to give a young kid. It's safer just to be by yourself. And unfortunately, we instilled some habits that we have yet to break. And so what it's doing is it's anesthetizing them. It's numbing them to life. They're not with each other. They're just on their phone. By the way, I have other data that's not on this PowerPoint about friendlessness among adults, because it's actually an uglier picture among adults, especially adult men. 16% of adult men in the United States report that they have 0 or 1 friend. 16%. That's alarming. That's alarming. When you go to up to 5 friends, I think the number is 34%. 34% of all men have 5 friends or less. Now, women, it's a little bit better picture, but not much. So there's kind of a crisis of friendship in our society, not just with our kids, but even with our adults, which, by the way, Philip, this is a great opportunity for the church. Because one of the things historically that the church has always been good at is community. Literally living life together. And so we are in a society right now where we are starving for community, and this is a wonderful opportunity for the church to actually offer the very thing that people are missing. And so in youth groups, I tell my youth minister this all the time. I tell him, never apologize for hosting an event in the church that isn't sufficiently Christian. Now, I put that in quotes, for this reason. Like, are we allowed to host something at the church where there's not a Bible study or there's not a worship set or something like that, just a fifth quarter after a football game or something like that? I tell them never apologize for doing that. Because wouldn't we rather the kids be at the church than anywhere else? Like, this is an opportunity that we have to actually get all these kids in the same place and have them experience some togetherness because they're not getting any of that in so much of their life. All right, next. This one, I love this. Well, I don't love this chart. This chart is interesting. It's actually a sad chart. So the red line this is U.S. 12th graders. So we're not really talking about middle schoolers now, okay? But 12th graders are kind of a reflection of, middle schoolers. The red line is those who are satisfied with their parents. Now that red line is really, it's good, right? That's an impressive, it's going in the right direction. Kids are satisfied with their parents. This goes up to 2022 right here. Starts in 1976. And this is the trend from 1976 to 2022. The blue line is not as good. The blue line is I'm satisfied with my life as a whole. So this is weird. So our kids are reporting they've never had a better relationship with their parents. But they're also reporting they've never been less satisfied with their lives. I don't exactly know what to make of this data. I don't know what to make of this information. Other than somehow parents aren't giving their kids what they need. We think we're giving our kids what they need, but I think we're missing the mark somewhere. Is it because we want to be friends with our kids and not parents with our? I don't know what the explanation is. But kids are satisfied with their parents, but unsatisfied with life as a whole.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the year that drops off?
So this is the COVID year right here, 2020. Okay. But it starts dropping in 2010 is when it really starts dropping. It hits the bottom in 2020. So can I give you an illustration? This is my favorite. I might do this tomorrow morning too, so if I repeat myself, don't boo me. So this is my favorite way of illustrating the situation that our kids are in today. What's your name? Kendra. So imagine that Kendra wakes up tomorrow morning and she's on a life raft by herself in the middle of an endless sea. She has no idea how she got there. She closes her eyes in Denver and she opens them and she's in the middle of the ocean on a life raft by herself. Now, Kendra, what would your first thought be in that moment? Mm-hmm. Would you be exhilarated? Like, oh man, finally some peace and quiet. Some time to myself. Or would you be terrified? Your first thought would probably be, am I still sleeping, right? So you'd be like, slap yourself. Am I still? No, once you finally verify that you're awake, I think all of us, our first thought would be, we would be terrified. We would be anxious. We would be fearful. We would be all of the things, right? None of us, though, would be like, oh, man, this is wonderful. I always wanted to go off on an adventure by myself. And, none of us would be feeling exhilarated in that moment. But you realize that this is exactly the picture of freedom that your kids have been given by their culture. Basically, your kids have been told this same message over and over and over and over again. They've been told, if you want to live a meaningful life, if you want to be happy, if you want to know what life is about and what's important, then the only voice that you should listen to is the voice coming from your own heart. Be true to yourself and follow your heart. Does that sound like a familiar message that you might have heard in our culture? The most important thing is to be true to yourself. The most important thing is to follow your heart. Don't listen to anyone else. Don't listen to your teacher. Don't listen to your preacher for sure. You don't even need to listen to your parents. What do your parents know? They don't know who you are. Only you know who you really are. Only you know what is meaningful and important to you. So the most important thing, the only important thing, is to follow your own heart. And our culture thinks that that's a message of freedom. Culture thinks that's a message of liberation. You're untethered, you're disconnected, you're by yourself. But that's not a message of freedom, that's a message of terror. That's a message of anxiety. When you tell, especially an adolescent kid in this difficult season of life where they're trying to figure out what's true, what's important, what's meaningful, what's my purpose, they're asking all these big questions, and you tell them that the only place that you're allowed to look for answers is within your own heart? That's horrifying. Because what happens when I look in my own heart and I realize there's not enough resources there to answer these questions? I don't have the answers to these questions. But I've been told that that's the only place that I can look. I can't listen to my parents. I can't listen to my preacher. I can't listen to my teachers. I suppose I can listen to entertainers as if they know something. But they're all telling me the same message. They're telling me just listen to my heart. So I'm stuck. I'm stuck on this life raft by myself, disconnected and alone. And we wonder why this generation is so anxious. Well, they're anxious because we put them in the middle of an infinite sea and told them, figure it out. They're not equipped to figure it out. This is a parent's responsibility. This is a teacher's responsibility. Oh man, if you're a teacher who tells your kids just follow your own heart, well, I'll keep my opinion to myself. You're not doing your job as a teacher. Actually, I'm in higher education. This has become higher education in the last 20 years, where people will spend tens of thousands of dollars getting a degree in higher education, and they'll encounter professors there who will just tell them, I got no answers for you. Oh, well, that's nice. You still going to cash my checks? I got no answers for you. Figure it out on your own. It's no wonder people want their student loans forgiven, you know? So, all right. It's also post-Christian. Oh, before I get into this is like my last slide, I think. But can I recommend one other book to you? I was going to put it in the slides, and I just ran out of time. But this is a book written by a woman named Jean Twenge, 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 and it's just called Generations. That's the title of the book. Generations. And she's a psychologist, teaches at San Diego State University. This is her research on the differences between the 5 living adult generations. So there are 5 living adult generations right now, and then there's also Gen Alpha, which is they're not adults yet, but they're soon to be adults. And this is a fascinating study. And one of the things, and I'll just leave this with you. One of the things that she finds in her research is we have become a very self-centered people. Now, I don't need a PhD in psychology to know that that's the case, okay? But she's actually got the data to support this, that we have become a narcissistic, self-centered people. But now here's the twist. It didn't start with Gen Z. Now she points out Gen Z, the most narcissistic generation in history, okay? It's just a fact. They're narcissistic, and they're also incredibly confused, especially about sex. They're incredibly confused about sex. They're having less sex, believe it or not. Gen Z having very little sex compared to previous generations, but they're also incredibly confused about sex, and they're confused about gender as well. And those of you parents in the room, you already know that's the case. Like the things that your kids are interacting with and coming home with from school, not at all like what we came home from with school in the 80s and the 90s, okay? Like the questions about identity and sex and stuff like that, it's a very confused time, right? But she points out that this whole trend towards narcissism started with the boomers. Now, I don't like the idea of blaming boomers for everything, okay? But she has she does this interesting thing. Any of you ever use Google Books? So Google has a website where they've actually cataloged like hundreds of thousands of books. And you can search for keywords and stuff like this. So she goes onto Google Books and she does keyword searches to see trends in literature over time. And she noticed, like in the boomer generation, there was a switch that happened when the boomers were young. The word get started to outpace the word give in literature. So I wish I would have put it in my PowerPoint, but like give in literature basically is flatline. But with the boomer generation, the word get starts to go like this. My generation, Gen X, I'm the self-esteem generation. Self-esteem was big in Gen X. And she does the same thing with Gen X. Self-esteem, like around like 1980 to 1990, the use of self-esteem in literature does the same thing. It just spikes. With Gen Z, the first person singular pronoun, my, mine, I, does the same thing. With Gen Z, the use of the first person pronoun goes like this, through the roof. And so she just shows over and over again how even in our literature, we were conditioned to be selfish. We were conditioned to think first about ourselves. And it started really with the boomers into Gen X and then eventually Gen Z. Last slide here. I think it's the last slide. No, yeah, it is. So, I don't think I'm telling you anything that you don't already know, but your kids are growing up in a post-Christian culture. And by post-Christian, here's all I mean by that. I don't mean that your kid is necessarily going to get persecuted for being a Christian at their public school. That's not really what I mean. What I mean is religious faith is not taken as a given. Religious faith is going to be more difficult for your kids than it was for you. It's going to be harder for your kids to have a public faith than it was for many of us growing up. I'm painting with some pretty broad brushstrokes. You understand there's going to be exceptions to all these things. But generally speaking, it's just socially, it's not as easy to be a follower of Jesus faithfully in our culture today than it was certainly for my parents' generation. And some authors compare it to growing up in Jerusalem versus growing up in Babylon. This is an Old Testament reference. There was a whole generation in Israel that was born in Jerusalem. So they were born literally in the shadow of the temple, in the holy city, that they knew it intimately. They had that experience. But then they were hauled off and sent into exile, into Babylon. Babylon, they conquered Jerusalem. And so this whole generation is uprooted and they're replanted in Babylon. But in Babylon, they keep having kids. And there's a whole generation of kids that are born in Babylon. And so they only hear stories about Jerusalem. They hear stories about the temple. They hear stories about God's holy city. They never experienced it themselves personally. They're hearing it only secondhand because you've got this generation. They're actually growing up in a very different cultural environment, an environment that is far from God's holy city. And so you have this generational divide. I think we have the same divide today, where you have grandparents who remember a very different culture than what their grandkids are growing up in. Or I went to a public high school in the Chicago suburbs, big high school. My graduating class was around 500 students, okay? So big high school, pagan high school, promise you, very pagan, okay? In my graduating class, there was one student who we knew was out of the closet as a homosexual. One in a class of around 500. I promise you, if you went back to that high school today, that would not be the case. My daughter started coming home with stories about her gay friend in 5th grade. My other daughter comes home as a 6th grader and talks about her pansexual friend. I live in Webb City, Missouri, one of the reddest of red places, okay? As conservative as it comes, church on every corner. And my 5th grader is coming home talking about her friend who's a lesbian. And that was a wake-up call for me. It was. Because I realized my daughters, my son, they are not at all growing up in the culture that I remember from when I was that age. And so as a parent, that's going to demand from me a different type of approach. I have to be willing to talk about things that might make me uncomfortable. I have to give especially my daughters, I have to give them wisdom to know how to navigate these relationships, because they're going to have to navigate relationships in ways that I never had to when I was that age. So talking to my daughter, Ryan, here's how you love your friend who's gay without also agreeing with everything that she's doing. That's a hard conversation to have with a 5th grader or a 6th grader, but it was a conversation we had to have. I didn't want to have it, but we had to talk about it. Here's what we believe. Here's what's right. Here's what's wrong. But here's how we love. Here's how we show acceptance, even when we don't agree. And even if the person says that you're a hater or whatever, like, that's okay. We're still going to love them nevertheless. Like, we have to have those conversations. I learned, Nick, I can't take anything for granted. When I'm in a CIY and I'm talking to a group of high school students, my assumption when I'm talking to those high school students is that every kid in that audience is a non-believer. Now, that's not literally true, and I know that's not literally true, but when I get up in front of that audience, that's the perspective that I bring, because I don't want to take anything for granted. Because these kids, even the ones that grew up in church, they're growing up in a very different culture where I can't just assume that these are like good, squared away Christian kids who know what's right and know what's wrong. Well, like, no, those days are over. These are kids that are growing up in Babylon. And it demands a different approach from me as a parent, as a teacher, whatever. Okay, here's what I'd like to do. How are we doing on time, Philip? I know I've gone late. Okay, so do we need a break, or do we want to ask some questions? Okay, it's overwhelming, the response. Let's just plow forward. Let's have a conversation, because I've talked way too much tonight. What sort of comments or questions do you have based on anything that you said? And I don't want to pretend as if I'm the only person in the world or the only person in the room that knows how to do this thing. You're all parents. You have your own wisdom and experience. And so who has a question or who has a comment that they want to make on anything that we've talked about tonight? Yeah. Yeah.
But think about it biblically speaking, why isn't Jesus resolving that?
Yeah.
Or what is lacking in the Christian faith creating this?
So it's dangerous for me to answer this question, because we could always give sort of the cliched answer, right? But I think there is an answer to this, which is, so Philip told you that I wrote a couple books. I wrote a book on Hebrews, and I wrote another book on loving Jesus with our mind. I'm literally working on a book right now on Ecclesiastes. So this is really fresh on my mind. I think the answer to it, Philip, is that we've actually allowed some idolatries to creep into our lives. And instead of grounding our identity, grounding our families, grounding our own lives in the foundation of Jesus and the foundation that we find in his word, instead of grounding ourselves in that, we've allowed our lives to be defined by all of the other things within our world and our culture. And so our faith is just one of many things about us. So it's not that we don't have faith. We do have faith. but our faith is just one of many things about us. And so when your faith is just one of many things about you, it's easy to marginalize that faith, right? And it's easy to put the emphasis in other places. And believe me, your kids see that. Your kids pick up on that. And so when push comes to shove, and I'm thinking about like what makes life meaningful, what brings my life purpose, well, I fall into this Ecclesiastes trap where, maybe sports brings my life meaning and purpose. Maybe making a lot of money does. Maybe pursuing as much pleasure as possible. Maybe that's what's going to lead to a satisfying life. The answer is right there, though. The answer is found in the gospel. Well, the answer is found in Jesus, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But we neglect that answer, and instead we pursue all of the answers that the world offers to us. And surprisingly enough, we find that it is empty. It doesn't really satisfy. And so I think that is the best explanation. We live in the word that one author uses is decadent. We live in a decadent culture, in a very affluent culture. Now, I know not all of us feel affluent all the time, but we do live in a very decadent culture. And the result of that, I think, is that we are living out the story of Ecclesiastes. We are discovering that all of this access to wealth and information and everything else, it doesn't really satisfy our innermost needs. I think that it all stems from moving Jesus away from the center and moving him to the margins of our lives. It's a cliched answer, but I think it's true. Other questions? Comments? So I'm curious, if we go back to this slide here, this one here, lessons that we've learned. I'm curious, have any of you learned any other lessons, or would any of you affirm these lessons that you've kind of discovered in your own family? Any conversation or discussion about this? Have you learned any other lessons that aren't on the screen, or would you affirm any of these? Yeah.
I really appreciate the creating rituals and traditions. We're pretty early on in our parenting career. Our oldest is just about 6.5. And we have 3 boys. I read a book called Raising a Modern Day Knight
Oh, yeah.
that essentially argues for that whole thing and laments how in our culture we have this lack of these rituals or traditions that, for at least boys specifically, officially move
Yeah.
into manhood. So the whole
Rites of passage.
rites of passage and stuff. Now that you've gone into this next season, here's how we're going to, portray that, and here are your new responsibilities and how you're going to be treated.
Yeah.
I would definitely prefer that.
And every family is going to be a little bit different in this. Every kid is going to be a little bit different in this. I have one of my very good friends. His whenever his kids turned 13, all of them would go on a bear hunt in Alaska. That was their rite of passage. So when they turned 13, they would go with dad to Alaska and they would hunt bears. And he has 4 kids, 3 boys, 1 girl. The only one who's ever shot a bear successfully was his daughter. His daughter, she got a bear. The others didn't. And so, that's sort of a, almost a cartoonish example of a rite of passage. But it could be something that's just special for your family, Like my family, we love to camp. Like we love to camp. That's a meaningful thing that our family does. And we have made so many core memories just in a camper, in some national park campground somewhere. Like that has been for our family some of the most meaningful moments. And what I would encourage you is to identify what are those meaningful moments, those meaningful places for your family. One of the things I lament for my kids, speaking of places, so there have been some places in my life that literally made me into the person I am. Like, I grew up going to church camp every summer, Lake Region Christian Assembly in Crown Point, Indiana. It is a sacred place for me that made me into a particular kind of person. I lament the fact that my kids won't have that same experience. They don't go to church camp. They go to CIY. I love CIY, but it's not exactly the same thing. And, just in our society in general, those sacred places are harder and harder to find, And I lament that for my kids. I do. I think they're missing that.
Hey, can you speak, you didn't touch on this, speak into what you see work and what you see not work, specifically with teenagers and dating.
Oh, yeah.
Because, obviously, and things have changed.
Yeah.
It's not like the George Strait song, check yes or no,
Yeah.
or whatever it was. Like, those days are long gone.
Yeah.
So what's working and what isn't working?
My son and I just had this conversation. So they're weird. Teenagers are weird now. And the rules of dating are so inscrutable now. So like, I'm of the mindset, like, if me see pretty girl, me ask her on date. Like, that's my caveman mindset. And my son and I were just having a conversation about girls. He's frustrated because he wants to have a girlfriend, but he doesn't know how to go about making the first move. And so I told him, well, go up to her and say, hey, do you want to go grab a bite to eat? Or you want to go get some coffee? Or shoot your shot, son. Do hard things. We have that conversation. If she tells you no, that's fine. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, go do it. But now the dating rules are so different. It's no, we got to go out as a group and got to get to and so it's got to I'm going to give you a long answer. I was in a mentor group, a small group of college students. It's about when you were still a student there. And one of the guys in my group, literally, we spent an hour looking at an Instagram message from this girl that he was interested in. And I was sitting there dumbfounded as they listed off a whole set of rules about when you can like the Instagram post, when you can respond to it, when you can open the direct message, what you can and cannot say. And I'm sitting there y'all are nuts, man. Just if you like her, just tell her that, So I get frustrated with the whole thing. I do. Because I think that in the dating relationships, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear of failure. There's a lot of fear of, vulnerability. And so I see that in a lot of the dating relationships, even on our college campus. Now, for my kids, I'll just tell you how we navigated that for my daughters and for my son. We had pretty definitive rules set in place for all of our kids as they're growing up. And we didn't spring these rules on them as soon as they entered into high school. We actually talked about these rules starting all the way back when they were in 5th grade, because I felt like that was important. I didn't want them to get into high school and have that first crush and then run headlong into dad's rules. I wanted them to know what the expectation was very early on. So we started talking about this in 5th grade. We started talking about intimacy stuff in 5th grade, and there's age-appropriate ways to do that. But I didn't want to wait until they got older, and then there would be resentment or there'd be questions or whatever. And so my 15-year-old daughter, I hear her repeat this back to me. She's a 15-year-old. She's got a lot of crushes on other little boys and stuff. And but she tells me, and she's told other boys, she's like, well, I'm not allowed to actually date anyone until I turn 16. And she's not angry about it. She's not disappointed about it. For her, this is just the way that the Ragsdales operate, because she's been told this ever since she's in 5th grade. We're not going to date until we turn 16. My son, it was the same way. Now, my other daughter, Adeline, she didn't start dating at all until she was just graduated from high school. So she didn't date anyone all throughout high school. But we just had pretty firm guidelines in place about what was expected. And What was not expected, I told my son, if you're going to ask a girl on a date, you're also going to have a conversation with her dad, because it's old-fashioned, but I just think that that's important. Go have a conversation with her dad, and just ask for his permission if you could take his daughter out on a date. And he did that, and it was awkward and hilarious. And yeah, that's one of the things that we've learned, though. One of the things that we've learned is like just over communicate, not in a harsh way, but just to offer clarity, because kids need clarity. What are the expectations? What is allowed? What's not allowed? I have, with my older kids now, I still have conversations about intimacy, and it makes them uncomfortable, but I don't care. Because I want them to know what my expectations are. And I want them to know, more importantly, what God's expectations are. And you know, especially as my kids get closer to being married, I want them to know, like, this, you want to protect your holiness. You want to protect that for your spouse. And that's an important thing. That's even though you're going to be different than most of the other kids that you're going to school with, at least in the case of my daughter, hopefully not in the case of my son going to Ozark. But, you know, you're going to be different than a lot of other people, but that's okay. Difference is good. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but just establish early on what your expectations are as a parent, and then stick to those expectations. It sounds
like you're also saying delay.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm the guest speaker, so I guess I can step on toes. We did not.
With that, they'll offer some guidance to those that are,
Yeah.
kids are 9 years old and aren't dating.
Yeah, so we did not do that. And my kids, they all had friends that they're having their junior high boyfriends and girlfriends and stuff like that. And we just told our kids in kind of a non-judgmental way, like, yeah, we know that your friend has a little boyfriend or whatever. That's not what we're going to do. And the reason that we're not going to do that is because, and I told my daughter this in junior high, having a relationship like that is, you've got to be more emotionally mature to actually have that relationship. And I want you, as a junior high girl, I want you to enjoy being a junior high girl. I don't want you to get all worried about boys. I want you to learn how to be emotionally mature, how to have good relationships without having the pressure. And that's the thing. I don't want you, like I would tell my daughter Ryan, I don't want you to feel the pressure as a 13-year-old girl to think about boys. I want to take that off of the table for you. Now, I'm not going to get mad if you come home talking about you have a crush on so-and-so or whatever. That's fine. And actually, I encourage that a little bit. It's okay. That's part of, as a junior high student, you're starting to grow in those areas too. So you're not going to offend me, but we're going to take that possibility off the table so that you don't have the pressure, so you don't have to worry about it. Because we've seen the girl crazy boy in junior high, or the boy crazy girl in junior high. And it actually, like, it leads to some instability a lot of times later on in life, you know? So I just want to take that off the table. And it would blow me away. Like, my son would come home as a 12-year-old, like his best friend, his parents drove his best friend and his girlfriend on a date to the movies, whatever. I'm like, what? They're 12. They don't need to be going on dates, you know? Now, if that steps on any toes in the room, I'm sorry, but not really sorry. So that's just for the Ragsdales. I just wanted to take the pressure off my kids. Relationships are good and important, but they're also good and important when you have a certain amount of emotional maturity. If you don't have emotional maturity, then they actually can be kind of devastating. So I'll just leave it at that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sort of switching from dating, what does like the friendship look like now? Because a lot of it would be virtual, and you talked about what that looks like in adults, as far as like students and even depth of friendships. Can you talk more about that?
So, with girls in particular, so I'm relying a little bit on Jean Twangy and her research. Girls are experiencing more bullying than ever in their relationships, largely because of social media. So what happens is you've got a vulnerable 14-year-old girl who's already going through weird, like, adolescent things, awkwardness, and, not really sure about her body, and she's got self-image issues. She's socially awkward. And so she's this vulnerable 14-year-old girl, and she's, as most 14-year-olds are, she's at home on a Friday night by herself with her parents, and she's in her room kind of feeling badly about herself, so she gets out her phone and she starts self-medicating with Instagram. And so she's flipping through Instagram, she sees these pictures and these reels, and then suddenly she sees the picture of her friend on Instagram, and her friend is posting a picture out with this other group of people, and included in that group of people is that boy that this girl kind of has a crush on. And so she sees this picture where her friend is not at home like a loser by herself. She's out, and she's looking cute, and she's looking pretty, and she's out with that boy that she has a crush on. And so that 14-year-old girl, in her vulnerability, she double taps the picture, liking the picture, because she has a social imperative to do that. So she likes the picture, but inside she's dying. Inside she's miserable and feels horrible about herself because she went to Instagram to sort of self-medicate, and that left her feeling empty. Now, you asked the shape and the structure of relationships today. So the big impediment to relationships today that I've observed in my own kids and that I've observed even in my college students is it's no longer the fear of missing out that is motivating them. It's now the fear of a better offer. So like my own kids, and it drives me crazy, they will stay home on a weekend night by themselves because they're just waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for a better offer to come along. And they're almost paralyzed socially to actually take the initiative and, hey, let's go do something. Let's go hang out. Let's go to Taco Bell. Let's go to a movie. Let's do whatever. Now there's just so much passivity. Well, eventually, if I just hang out on my phone long enough, eventually something will happen. But nothing really ever happens. And so you end up just being isolated and alone. This is hard for me as a Gen X parent because I was used to, like, as soon as I turned 16, I was in my car, bye mom, bye dad, I'm out, right? But that doesn't seem to be the case for a lot of teenagers today. Now they're much more cautious, much more passive, and because they're more passive, they're also being more isolated. So I actually have to kick my kids, especially my son, I have to kick him out of the house. Matter of fact, he's supposed to be out of the house tonight because I told him, it's Saturday night, you're a college student, you ought not be at my house. And it's a shame that I have to have that conversation with him, but I just do. Because otherwise, he's just sitting there waiting for life to happen. I'm like, no, don't wait for life to happen. You're 20 years old. Get out there and live life. But I don't think he's totally unusual in that respect. I think and as a youth minister, I'm sure that this passivity oftentimes rears its head. Like you want to get kids involved and active and doing stuff, but there's just this, like this anesthetized is the word that I use. They're just numb, waiting for something to happen. Yeah.
On that same topic, we have two girls, and when I'm watching through learning through the lessons learned,
Yeah.
we have created rituals and traditions as a family.
Yeah.
The camping and all this
Yeah.
stuff together. Did you ever find challenges specifically with your daughters to create rituals and traditions specifically with them?
Yeah.
And then I look at it too, like involvement being non-negotiable.
Yeah.
I tie those together
Mm-hmm.
for me, right? Like because they are passive. I find like, what do you want to go do?
Mm-hmm.
Go to Starbucks. Let's do. And
Yeah.
they
So-
are like numb to like that.
Yeah.
A lot.
So on family stuff, it is non-negotiable. So if the family is going camping, whether you like camping or not, you're going. If the family is going on a forced march, which is what I call hiking, then guess what? You're going on a forced march. So I've discovered that the whining eventually goes away. If you can wait out some whining, you don't have to succumb to whining. You can wait it out. Especially as they get older, you're like, you know what? No, sorry, I'm not going to hear it. You're going, deal with it. And maybe I'm just speaking for my own kids, but eventually they kind of self-correct and they recognize that this is a family thing that we're participating in. But to answer your question though, so with my kids, we do have family things that we do together, but I also have been pretty intentional about developing special things with each one of my kids individually. And so with my son, every year, outside of the Waffle House thing, we take a pilgrimage to Chicago and go to Wrigley Field, watch a Cubs game. Or every fall, we go to a Notre Dame game. Because for him, it's like sports. So that has become the ritual. Now, my daughters couldn't care less about that. I'm not going to drag them along for that. So that's become our special thing. I take my youngest daughter to movies all the time. Just me and her. We'll just go to a movie. And then afterwards, we'll go eat some spicy food because she loves spicy food. So, and she loves that. She actually tells her friends, she's like, I'm my dad's movie girl. That's how she calls herself. She's like, I'm my dad's movie girl because she takes pride in the fact that she goes to movies with dad. The other two kids don't. With my daughter, Adeline, my middle daughter, she's a little bit tougher because she's not super sentimental. She's not super emotional. So I will sometimes take her on dates just to spend time with her. But I've also discovered that the key to her heart is music. And so we'll listen to music together. And sometimes we'll make music together. I'll play on the piano. She'll play on the guitar or something like that. So it's about trying to find the key to your kid's heart and establishing rituals and traditions around that. At least that's what I've discovered, you know.
It's interesting. The involvement is non-negotiable from our experience. I would say at times that drives parent satisfaction rate down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Initially, right?
Yeah.
Like that graph.
Uh-huh.
Like, all right, our satisfaction rate's going down. But inside of that, like, we have good things for our kids.
Yeah.
Like, and no discipline is,
Yeah.
at the time, right? So does that, like, hey, that discipline, like the involvement's non-negotiable,
Mhm.
family, good things in mind for your kids, does that correlate between the fact it may drop your satisfaction
Yeah.
rate, but overall you
Yeah, so on the involvement is non-negotiable. So part of this is doing hard things, so not everything is going to be enjoyable, and you shouldn't expect in life that I'm only going to do those things that are enjoyable. Sorry, that's not what life is. Sometimes we're going to do things that are boring. Sometimes we're going to do things that aren't fun, but that's what life consists of. Like if you only do things, if you learn as a child that you only have to do things that are fun, you're going to be a pretty bad adult. So that's one of the things I want my kids to learn, like even like church stuff. Not every church event is fun and exciting and whatever, but you're going to go and you're going to participate because it's not about whether or not it's enjoyable. It's about instilling certain habits, and these habits over time make you into a particular kind of person. I believe that in my core, that our habits shape us into particular kinds of people. And so doing hard things, doing boring things, it's okay because that shapes us into a different kind of people. Now, there's another side of this, though. When I say that involvement is non-negotiable, I don't want to be a tyrant about this. I want to have regular communication with my kids. So like, for instance, I'm blessed by a wonderful church. So this has never come up in our experience as a church. But if I'm dragging my kids to church and they are consistently having an awful experience at church, they're not being taught, they're not being encouraged. Well, I've got to be careful with that, don't I? Because that might actually instill some bad habits in them where they can't wait until they get old enough to just leave church behind. So I've got to be the type of parent that's also listening to my kids and learning to discern, is this just childish whining? Or is this something more significant that I need to pay attention to? And so listening in the midst of that is, I think, important. And even on like the family vacation stuff, I'll throw my daughters a bone every once in a while. Now, so like last summer, it broke my heart. But last summer, I told my oldest daughter, she's graduating from high school, I'm like, so you get to choose the family vacation this year. And she chose not to go camping. And we had to go sit on a beach for a week. And it broke my heart, but involvement is non-negotiable, and that includes Dad. So we did her thing for a year, and it was great. It was fun. Other questions? We're about out of time. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to respect everything you said, but how can, I know this like is more for parents, but like how can the church come alongside parents or like specifically the youth group to like would creating this space for them to just come together and like hang out and
Yeah.
like create those relationships, be beneficial, or like just how can we help them
Yeah.
like love the faith and like want to make it their own with partnering with the parents?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I don't think there's like a one-size-fits-all approach. I can only tell you what has worked in our family's experience, which is that what is the church really? Well, some people, when they think of the church, they think of programs that the church has. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Programs are good. Youth ministry programs are good. Small group programs are good. But fundamentally, what the church is a relationship between like-minded believers. So it's akin to a family, right? That's fundamentally what the church is. And so I'm not going to give you a super satisfactory answer, but I can only testify to my own experience. What made all the difference in the world for my kids is that I go to a large church, 3,000 people. But within our church, there's about 5 or 6 core families that my kids have literally grown up with. From the moment they were in cribs up until college, they've grown up with these families. They've grown up with their kids. They've grown up with their parents. When my kids come home from college, they're just as likely to go visit some of these other families before they even come to our own home. That's how close our families are. Like my college student came home from college, and I was watching the Super Bowl at some other family's house, and she chose to come sit with a bunch of old people and watch the Super Bowl rather than go to her boyfriend's house that night, which I'm like, when? And the reason why was because her boyfriend's great, but the reason why is because these are adults that have been meaningful in her life, and she hadn't seen them for a while, and she wanted to spend a little bit of time with them. And so this wasn't something that we set out to do. We didn't plan this. It just sort of happened that within the church, we developed these relationships, these bonds, and the families helped raise each other's kids. And how can churches come along and facilitate that? Well, if you're talking about a program, like a good, healthy, small group ministry program that puts families with other families in their lives together, I have the personal philosophy that the best small groups are life groups. So in other words, they're not groups that only, we're going to meet together for 6 weeks and then we'll be done. That's fine. A lot of churches do it that way. But what's been meaningful for us is we are literally living our lives together as a group. In youth ministry, finding adult volunteers who love kids and want to spend time with kids and invest in kids, this is also critically important so that kids that are growing up in the church, they can identify examples of godly faith in other adults beyond their parents, and those will become the mentors and the guides for your kids. I love the fact that my wife and I, we are the primary disciplers for our kids, but we're not the only disciplers for our kids. They have other people in their life that they can call, that they can get wisdom from. And so just kind of facilitating that sort of participation from adults within the church. Like, I'm rambling, but churches need to catch the vision for the next generation, right? Like that's kind of a cultural thing, a church culture thing. Like, are we the type of church culture that is passionate for the next generation of the church? We're not passionate for ourselves. The church isn't about us. The church is like, we want to raise up the next generation of leaders for the church. And so the church has to coalesce around that vision, where we have people that are just dedicated to spending their time serving in the youth ministry or in the children's ministry or whatever to help raise up that next generation of leaders. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but okay. Well, this has been fun. I think we're over time actually, but thanks for hanging out and spending your Saturday night with me. I appreciate it.
Yep. Appreciate you, man. Hey, please give him a hand. Thank you. Hey, and as a church, we just want to reemphasize to you a little bit of where he was leaving off there, is that we do value the family. I mean, if anything, I would say that we are a family church. That's why we're offering a night like tonight. And glad so many of you were able to take advantage of this evening. And it's only going to continue to ratchet up more and more into the future as we are attempting to instill more of these biblical, Christ-centered values into your kids. To his point, and the point that we've made in the past, is like, we do value this generation that's coming up of kids, and we know that they are the future of the church, and we value you and your marriages and your families, and we want you to be stronger because you're a part of this community. And so again, thank you for being here tonight, and really do appreciate that. You missed Kayla and Nick Brown. Kayla is our student ministry assistant. She shot out. They had to get home for a babysitter. But you obviously have Nick here, who's doing a great job leading up our students. Please engage with him, connect with him, ask him questions as you see fit and is necessary. Yeah. And I know that we've also got some others of you that are even helping in the ministry, and we appreciate you. But to Mr. Chad here's point, that we are looking for new leaders to come into that space and to be mentors and to invest in these kids and to guide them along through some of these challenging questions. And if that is something that you'd be interested in, please talk to Nick, connect with him about that. If it is something that you are interested in, or maybe you know somebody that's interested in, please do that. We sure would appreciate it. But I'm going to say a word of prayer for us, and we'll wrap things up, and we'll see you bright and early in the morning. So let's pray. Father, grateful for this evening and all the words that were shared with us. God, may we be better parents, better leaders in our homes. Father, we do pray for a protecting hand that only you can offer around our children. Guide them, Lord, mold them, shape them. Father, your spirit that is within, Lord, may it truly grab a hold of them, and may each of those children be in step with your spirit. And Father, we again pray that we give you glory, honor, and praise through our lives and our families. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. All right. Thank you all. Have a good night.